Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to today's full council meeting. On behalf of everyone, I would like to apologise for the delay that this has taken and for the technical issues that we are experiencing. I can confirm to elected members that an investigation will be undertaken and the outcome will be relayed to members through an elected member briefing note at the earliest opportunity to resolve these issues going forward. I'm going to go back to Councillor Peter Barrett to ask his question again so that all members can hear his question, and then I'll come to Fiona Robertson to answer his question.
Thanks very much, Provost. Question was in two parts. I think Fiona Robertson answered the first, but it was with regard to, did we know at a ward level or at an SMIMD level what the percentage of youngsters achieving the recommended daily levels of activity was. Obviously, we've got the target for 60% of them to be achieving that, but I'm not sure where we're starting from. And the second part of the question, and I'll be briefer, was what is the biggest factor in driving up youngsters' activity levels, and what should our top priority be for investment to tackle the crisis of inactivity?
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Just to recap briefly on the first part of your question for councillors who couldn't hear, the participation levels, activity levels in our highest areas of multiple deprivation varies, and we do need more data on that. But it's to give you an idea, it's generally between around 35 and 56%, depending on the area that you're talking about. On your second question, the factor that makes most difference to youngsters in terms of whether they get active and remain active is participation in active schools. And that's demonstrated through research carried out by Sports Scotland, which is relevant Scotland-wide, but also to Perth and Kinross.
Thanks very much for that, Fiona. And I think previously you'd said that one of the urgent actions in the first year was to start getting data at a more granular level.
Yes, it is. We need better data in two areas on physical activity and sport. One is around participation, so that we can understand the barriers to participation, not just for young children and young people, but the population as a whole. The other is how we utilise sport and leisure facilities, because we do have a lot of good facilities across Perth and Kinross. They're not always ideal in terms of where they're sited, but the key to making the most of what we do have is to understand how people are currently using those facilities and how we can make better use of them in the future. And that goes for dedicated facilities as well as those on our community campuses.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona. And Councillor Collins Stewart next, please.
Thanks, Provost. So a couple of questions. The first one is just very briefly whether in 4.2 of the annex there's reference to the stakeholders consulted who are listed in Appendix 3, but Appendix 3 isn't attached. And then in the next paragraph, the communication strategies to the public launch is to take place in April 2023, so I assume that will be delayed. But the substantive question was on section 6.1 about the structural implications, where it says that the proposed remit and objectives of the review of the current delivery structures for culture and sport will be submitted to the Transformation and Change Board for approval. And I just wondered whether there might be some elected member involvement at that point, because obviously there would be no point in officers going and asking other officers to approve a transformation review and then going and doing that and coming back to us with results which were not what we are expecting or would ask for if we were given the input at that stage. Thanks.
Thanks for your points on you're just pointing out the areas in terms of the appendices. Councillor Stewart will pick that up. On the transformation review of ALIOs, and the Chief Executive may want to add to this, that review is within the wider approved transformation programme, which is overseen by the Transformation Board. So the first step for me as the lead officer for that review will be for the Transformation Board to review and approve the terms of reference and scope of the review, and we expect to do that in the next couple of months, with recommendations going forward to the board later on this year. In terms of elected member involvement, Chief Executive might want to comment.
Just checking that members can hear me at this point. Assuming that they can. Yeah, just picking up on the comments from Fiona. As she said, the initial work on the review will come back to the Transformation Board, where there are options that are set out that have implications for the ALIOs themselves structurally. That would be a matter that we'd have to consider with our colleagues in legal and governance in terms of the effective independence of the three bodies concerned. But there would be a paper brought back to Council or the appropriate committee to set out those implications and to look for a Council decision where that would be required.
Okay, thank you. Councillor John Duff, please.
Thanks, Provost. On page 107 in the second paragraph, the report mentions the 3 distinct festivals which certainly deserve mention in their own right. But I was wondering if I could put in a plea for the inclusion of the Perthshire and Angus Provincial Mod, which is held annually at Aberfeldy and which this year celebrates its 100th anniversary. It's a festival which is supported by Perth Kinross Council, and it's one of the biggest Gaelic cultural festivals on the mainland outside of the Royal National Mod. I'm sure members will recall came to Perth last year and was a significant benefit to the city. So it's just a plea. I'll leave it to Fiona to decide whether or not to include it. Thank you.
Warren Tang, Councillor Duff, we will pick that up in the final version. Also, just to mention that the new Gaelic language plan, which is about Gaelic language learning, but it's also about our Gaelic culture, will come forward to Council later this year for approval too.
Thank you. Councillor Willie Robertson next, please. Do we have Councillor Robertson?
Yes, sorry, I couldn't get it to unmute. Thank you, Provost. I noticed that a lot of the requirements are searching for funding, both in the artistic and the sporting section, and being involved in a number of charities and things. Everyone is actually trying to feed from the same well of pots of money. And I was wondering if any consideration had ever been given to actually charging a levy on all our hotels and accommodation spaces in Perth and Kinross. I know this is done throughout Europe now, and it creates a great deal of money to spend in local infrastructure like sports and cultural facilities. Has that ever been considered as part of a source of funding?
Councillor Robertson, Barbara Renton will want to pick up on the second part of your question. I'm sure on the first part, the strategies, and I mentioned this to Council in December when we brought the draft strategies to you first, where we've identified potential for external funding. That's on the basis we think there is a realistic chance of getting that funding. It's not guaranteed, but clearly in the operating environment that we're in, these need to be very pragmatic strategies. There's no point in having long wish lists of things that are not fundable and will never be fundable. And also my comment before recess about how we diversify and grow income streams from non-public sources. So these are both of them intended to be quite practical strategies in terms of what we deliver has either got to be within the resources that we already have or has a realistic prospect of funding from elsewhere, but Barbara may want to comment on the question about tourist levy.
Thank you, Fiona. Councillor Robertson, the council is always open to how we can raise additional funding, particularly for specific areas of the council and activity within that. The issue will remain about, you know, sort of the legislative process for that, but we continue to look at all opportunities.
Okay, can I ask Mrs. Renton a supplementary? Are we allowed to do that as a council, or it has to be has it got to be agreed at a Scottish Parliament level?
I think that in terms of, you know, sort of where we are, we're waiting, you know, sort of, and someone else, maybe probably the council leader, would, you know, sort of, we're waiting for further guidance, but it would be levied in a council. If it's permissible, it would be levied in a council area.
That's super, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Allen next, please.
Thank you. It's basically on pages 197 and 199 under community workshop. It's the workshop feedback with regards to Auchterarder. There are a number of points made under weaknesses and barriers in Auchterarder. A good number of those issues are about a lack of football facilities, poor maintenance, facilities are dated and damaged, they're flood damage, they're vandalism, the list goes on, and understand that these are points made by the community. However, as officers will be well aware, I share these concerns and I would like to be heavily involved in seeking ways to improve that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. I think that's taken on board. Councillor Donaldson, you had a second question.
Unmute the room.
Sorry. Are you okay?
Councillor Donaldson, if you can use the room IT microphone rather than your own microphone, and if you can make sure your device is muted and your speakers are muted, that will ensure that we can hear you. You can leave your camera on though, so that we can see you.
That's it. Provost, can you hear me now? Provost?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Right, my first question I asked about the Invest in Culture and Sport initiative, and obviously one of the benefits, we're looking to raise 5 million over 5 years at least there, and the benefits with the ALIOs that they have charitable status, meaning there's benefits in terms of gift aid and actually raising the funds. Second question though is on page 137, relates to the council's grant schemes, and we state there, alongside we will set up a one-stop shop portal for community culture and sport grants. Could I just ask Fiona Robertson, that portal, which hopefully will be in place by March of next year, will it relate specifically to council grants, or it will give links to external fund-making bodies? And will it also, and we do this I know to some degree already, but will it give advice and guidance to community groups on how to apply? Because many of them find filling in the forms and the paperwork involved really is a bit of a block. in terms of trying to take things forward? Thank you.
So the portal, and there is a wider piece of work underway at the moment, Councillor Donaldson, as part of another transformation review to look at how we manage the whole small grants systems in Perth and Kinross and try and streamline that for community groups for all sorts of different purposes. In terms of improving the criteria to make the whole process as straightforward as possible for community groups, that would always be our aim. And with other schemes, for example, the Community Investment Fund, we do review and update the criteria in the application process. There needs to be some kind of application process so that the council can follow through the money, as you'll acknowledge. In terms of whether the portal will signpost applicants to other sources of support, yes, it will do where possible. That's never going to be completely comprehensive. We do some of that already. So we send out regular funding digests to our community networks.
So basically the aim is to make things, as far as possible, much more joined up and coherent. Yeah.
More joined up and coherent for applicants, and also more efficient and effective within the council as well. So we've got more consistent processes and ways of managing grants, monitoring them and paying out funds.
Okay, thanks, Fiona.
Thank you. Councillor Frost, final question.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Fiona, on page 104, it says we must find new ways to bring people back into our cities and towns. And I wondered what difference it would make if we had everyone back at work in Perth and Kinross Council offices across Perth and Kinross. Have you given any thought as to what difference that would make?
Councillor Forster, I think that
Chief Executive would take this question.
Apologies.
Apologies for jumping in, but I think the question is less about the leisure and culture strategy and more about the council's approach to the smart working model. We're very clear that since COVID, there are a significant number of employees who continue to deliver services in a whole range of locations through education, depots, other frontline services. We have adopted a smart working model for teams within office environments, and that continues to be the model that we are rolling out and continue to support. Teams are encouraged to spend time in the office as they see necessary to ensure that there's team cohesion and connection of colleagues across the council. But in terms of the carrying out of many duties, that can be done just effectively from a number of locations, whether it's home, whether it's offices, or whether it's working in locations across Perth and Kinross, and that's something that we will continue to do. We don't have any intentions to ask our teams to return to offices on a full-time basis.
Thank you. Councillor Lane to move the report, please.
Okay, thanks, Provost. Councillors, we've considered these strategies and draft before, but I want to re-emphasise the strong focus in both documents on the art of the possible. The Council has for many years been unswerving in its recognition of the key role which culture and leisure play in sustainable economic growth, health and well-being, inclusion and equality of opportunity. I know that all of us, whatever our political allegiance, recognise this, but the financial challenges ahead mean we must also recognise the need to do things differently in future to make the most of the significant culture and sports assets we already have. In less than a year, we will be marking the opening of Perth Museum as one of the most exciting and important new cultural assets for Scotland, as well as Perth and Kinross. In this context and at this time, it is right for the Council to acknowledge the tireless enthusiasm and support of John Bullough, whose death was announced earlier this week, in bringing the Stone of Destiny to Perth. John was also the first chair of the Perth City Leadership Forum and a passionate advocate of our local heritage, and he will be very sadly missed. Councillors, I move this report.
Thank you. Councillor Drysdale, second.
Thank you, Provost. Colleagues, I shall be brief. As this paper states, both culture and sport are integral to this council's unanimously approved corporate plan vision of making Perth Kinross the best place in Scotland for everyone to live life well, free from poverty and inequality. As Fiona Robertson has set out, we need to make both culture and sport as readily accessible as possible to everyone, young and old, across the full spectrum of events and activities we are able to offer directly or through our arm's length external organisations. To do this, it is essential that not only do we make full use of our local assets, including, of course, our wonderful natural environment, but also we look to grow our offerings by astutely deploying both public money and by attracting new private investment. Our other main focus will be on increasing participation as much as possible by lowering barriers to attract those who currently do not engage in culture or sport, perhaps because of cost, lack of local availability, or because of health reasons. I believe this proposed strategy will help us deliver on these key objectives, and I urge colleagues to approve. Happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. Councillor Peterban with a comment.
Yeah, thanks very much, Provost, and I want to endorse what the proposer and seconder of the report have said. I think it's also timely to note that this week Perth and Kinross Council announced that from the next football season, pitches in Perth and Kinross parks would be available free of charge, and that clubs just have to register their interest and the pitch they want and the dates they need them in order to achieve that. And I think that make a big difference to improving accessibility of sport and football in Perth and Kinross. I think it would not be or certainly wouldn't want this report to pass without mention of some significant equalities cultural events in our annual calendar. I'm thinking of LGBT History Month, which runs for the month of February, in which this council has been very active in proposing or promoting the story of LGBT community in Perth and Kinross and across Scotland. Similarly, Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month, which runs for the month of June, is something that we've got a proud record of promoting. Our Chinese New Year and Mooncake festivals are also part of that cultural calendar, and very recently we celebrated the first Sri Lankan New Year festival, which I'm sure that the members who accompanied me along to those celebrations in the North Inch found a really positive enhancement of our cultural festivals and celebrations that we've had to date. I think some of the aspects of this report make for really uncomfortable reading. The fact that we're the 8th worst local authority in Scotland in terms of physical activity and sports participation is something that I think we really have to get to grips with, and whether something on the lines of these reports or that fact, whether that needs to be brought to the Anti-Poverty Task Force to see whether they can get their teeth into it and help drive forward solutions to that, I think would be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor John Raybeck.
Provost, just very briefly want to wish all the school football teams the best in their finals. I think the first one's this Friday, and in particular Perth High School for getting to the Scottish Cup final, which is quite a remarkable achievement. Health and well-being is centred around often physical activity, and football in Perth and Kinross plays its part. I'd like to echo Councillor Barrett's comments. I'm very proud of our administration here that we made a small but important step in making grass football pitches free from the start of next season. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Raybeck. Councillor John Duff.
Thanks, Provost. Yes, there's a lot of very useful information about culture and sport across Perth and Kinross, and I'd like to thank Fiona and their team for collating and drafting the report. If I can be a bit parochial for a moment and mention the work ongoing at the Scottish Crannig Centre on Loch Tay, which is on page 132, under Making Culture Count in Tackling the Climate Emergency. And here I should just state for the record that I'm on the board of trustees with Crannig, but I don't think it's a declarable interest in this context. The Crannig Centre has the ambition of being the most sustainable museum in Scotland. And just the other day I was watching an amazing time-lapse video of the new Roundhouse building, which they're currently erecting on their new site at Delerb. Within the new Iron Age settlement they're using locally sourced hazel branches, stone from the nearby Taymouth Castle estate, reeds from the Tay reed beds and turf from local farms, and wood from the forest in Drummond Hill just across the road. It's a real gem in our cultural offering, and there's some amazing work going on with young and disadvantaged people as well as their climate change and museum ambitions. It's a great cause which we, the council, have supported financially, and after the disastrous fire, it's great to see the new site emerging from the ashes, and well worth a visit. If I can just plug the Crannig before I finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duff, and I echo those remarks. Councillor Leishman next, please.
Thanks very much, Provost. Here in Perth Kinross, in every ward, there is a catalogue of poverty and inequality, including people's ability to access culture, sport and leisure. The failed social experiment of austerity, plus the perpetual underfunding to local authorities, has led to us having to do the near impossible and provide the services residents need on an ever-diminishing budget. All strands of poverty are interconnected, and this assortment of inequality leads to the ultimate difference between the richest and poorest in society, that of life expectancy. And obviously, as the primary provider of services, the onus is on us, the council, to do whatever we can. Reviewing how we do things should be a constant process, and as a board member of Live Active Leisure, I am aware of the pressures facing our allios. We appreciate that our residents are struggling with the increase in the cost of living, but we also need to encourage our people to use our facilities, not just for our own business survival, but more importantly for the general health and well-being of our customers, our residents. Our allios will undergo a period of review, and we appreciate the need to work more collaboratively, sharing resources and expertise, and the analysis PKC are going to undertake will allow us to reorganise how we deliver sport, leisure, and also our cultural offering. Hopefully in such a way that removes as many of the barriers our residents have in accessing them as we possibly can. To finish, I would like to thank Fiona Robertson for the report and all our staff across our organisation. In these dire times, necessity is the mother of invention. Changing how we do things is required, and our staff will be crucial in helping us deliver the services our communities rely on. One of the most cowardly things we can do is to shut our eyes to the facts. The stark reality is that if nothing changes regarding funding, then things are just going to get worse, because cuts have consequences. And because come the next budget, we will just be facing the same task of seeing what must be sacrificed and managing the decline of Perth Kinross. How we deliver essential services is just part of the solution. The other parts are people's standard of living increasing and people being lifted out of poverty so that our economy can actually grow, and this can only be realised by a dramatic culture change in both Westminster and Holyrood governments. Thank you.
I know.
Can members hear me? We're having some additional technical issues here. If the Leader of Council could sum up, please.
Okay, thanks, Provost. I appreciate your nod to culture there by coming over Old Dalekey. which was interesting. But yes, I'm happy to sum up. I'm happy to take on board some of what all the other contributors had to in their comments. I think we all want to achieve exactly the same thing, and but I think we maybe just have different ways of getting there. I'm sure working together we will manage to achieve that with the best, using the resources that we will have at our disposal to the best of our ability, along with officers. I'd like to thank officers for bringing this paper. It's a very important paper for many of the reasons that Councillor Leishman stated, and I'm sure that everyone within the chamber will work to help officers achieve what we all want to achieve. The only other thing I'd like to pick up was on Councillor Forbes's comment, where I wholeheartedly agree with the approach of the Chief Executive regarding our workforce. I think that we as elected members work remotely. Some of us work remotely quite a lot of the time, and to ask our staff to come back in the chamber, to come back into Perth to work full time and not give them the choice would then mean that we would have to do also. And I'm sure that elected members are able to fulfil their work commitments from home or by hybrid means. So I think that I just want to put on record my support for the way that the Chief Executive and senior officers are approaching the return to work, which is not a return to work because they've always been at work, our officers, all through the COVID pandemic, and they're continuing to work. So it's not a return to work at all. So thank you, Prog. And with that, I'd like to move the report, so that's where I'm just now. I don't know where the Provost is in my room along with the senior officers, and as obviously Lynn has kicked them out after half an hour as she was instructed to.
Clearly we have been timed out. Okay, members, can we agree the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. I'm going to come to Stuart Mackenzie for item 7.
Thank you, Provost, and good afternoon. Councillors, can I just check everyone can hear me? I'll take that as a yes. This report asks members to approve the updated financial regulations as set out in Appendix 1. This is essentially a housekeeping exercise which allows me to discharge my statutory responsibilities as proper officer for finance within the policy context set by Council. The updates are largely presentational, although the regulations have been updated to reflect changes in the scheme of administration or other Council policies. Happy to take questions, Bost.
Okay, I have Bailey Ahern.
Can I just confirm that the only change I noticed on there was the highlighted paragraph 12.5 on page 30 or page 242 of the papers? Is that correct?
Thank you, Bailey Ahern. That's not the only change, but actually that's not a substantive change. It's more typographical error. I'm happy to take members very quickly through the changes, but they are very limited within the paper. That's more typographical error.
It might be handy because when we're asked to recommend the changes and we don't know what the changes are, it's very difficult to agree them.
Okay, I'll keep this brief, deliberately brief. So bear with me. The main changes are that new regulations have been added to section 1 in relation to the operation of the Council's charitable funds. That's paragraphs 1.19 to 1.24. In section 5, that's environment, the regulations have been updated in accordance with the scheme of administration. That's paragraph 5.1. And the regulations on devolved school management have been amended in accordance with a new approved DSM scheme. That's paragraphs 5.4 to 5.6. And for information, the DSM budget's the maximum carry forward of underspends is now set at 2.5% rather than the previous 10%. And as mentioned in the covering report, the regulations covering fees, gifts and hospitality in section 19 have been updated to cover the core controls as further guidance set out in both the Employee Code of Conduct and the Elected Members Code of Conduct. And beyond that, everything else is really presentational. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Stuart. Can you hear me online?
Yes, boss.
Great, wonderful, fantastic. Okay, Councillor Donaldson next, please.
Can you hear me? Provost?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Right, okay. Just one question. Page 221, we state about ALIOs and joint boards and committees. That includes, I presume, Tayside contracts, and where we did and take the position, it went to Finance and Resources, and it wasn't veered because the amount involved was over 100,000. What I would like to ask Stuart Mackenzie, though, is this: is the position in terms of financial regulation with regards to Tayside Pension Fund. Councillor Duff from Angus and myself from here are on the board, but the Dundee City Council are the enabling authority and with the pension subcommittee. So can I just ask Stuart, is there anything you'd want to say on the pension fund?
Thank you, Councillor Dawson, for your question. Just very briefly, as you said, Dundee City Council have the administering authority for the Tayside Pension Fund. So in terms of financial governance, that is really a matter for elected members in Dundee, and Dundee City Council will have their own financial regulations and own financial governance arrangements and particular guidance in relation to matters relating to the pension fund. So that's not an issue for the council. So that's really all I can add.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Colin Stewart next, please.
Thanks, Provost. So my first question is on, well, I'll follow up from Bailey Hearn's question. So one of the changes the Head of Finance pointed out was in the environment section in 5.1. And I was just wondered what the change actually in that section is and whether the Head of Finance has a limit on the adjustments that they're authorised to make.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. So the limit which has been placed by Council in amending the scheme of administration and the narrative within the financial regulations is taken verbatim from the scheme of administration approved by the Council, is that within the overall net revenue budget approved by Council, I have authority to move budgets between budget headings, and there's no financial limit upon that. There is no authority for me to increase or reduce the net expenditure of the Council without Council or Finance and Resource Committee approval.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then I just wondered if we could get clarity on the preceding paragraph 4.8 about Finance and Resources Committee noting application of earmarked reserves retrospectively. It's not always retrospective, is it? Sometimes it's done in advance. What are the what is this paragraph actually telling me about noting the application retrospectively? Is it about noting the way that the funds have been spent, or is it about noting any scheme used to disperse the earmarked reserve?
I think it's just effectively seeking to clarify that, one, that the earmarking of reserves, of what's a recommendation from myself, remains the province of committee and elected members to approve, and secondly, that normally that would be either for a particular purpose, and that may be delegated to an individual officer, or if it's part of the overall management of the reserves, that sits on myself. So that's all that paragraph is trying to achieve, Councillor Stewart. I'm sorry if it's not clear, but it's really a procedural matter. It's not about impacting on the governance arrangements we have over reserves.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last one. Thanks very much. The last one is just on 17.3 briefly. The Executive Director Communities has authority to authorise expenditure from the approved Common Good budgets. I thought that all applications came to the relevant Common Good Fund committee, but I don't see any mention of the Common Good Fund committees in that section.
That is correct. The decisions that are being authorised are taken by the Common Good Fund Committee. So as members will be aware, the recommendations to apply Common Goods funds are taken through the respective Common Good Fund committees. On reflection, I think we maybe just need to look at how that's worded.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful. It confused me as well. So if it confuses you, then I'm glad I wasn't alone, Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Leader of the Council to move the report, please.
Thanks, Provost. Councillors, it is good practice to ensure that the rules under which the Council operates remains fit for purpose. Keeping with that, this update of our financial regulations is simply a refresh of what has been previously approved. As the Head of Finance has earlier confirmed, there are no material changes to this update. The proposed changes are either presentational, they relate to reporting lines and structures, or remove sections that are covered within other council policies. Finally, as the report sets out, we may be asked to approve further updates to the financial regulations in due course as the leadership review progresses, which I welcome. I move the paper.
Thank you. Deputy Leader to second.
Yeah, happy to second, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. Any comments on the paper? If there are no comments, our members have to agree paper. Agreed. Thank you. Members, item 8 is the Treasury and Investment Strategy and Prudential Indicators, and Stuart McKenzie will also introduce this paper.
Thank you, Provost. This report considers both the Council's future borrowing requirements, the Treasury strategy, and management of the Council's short-term cash surpluses, the annual investment strategy. The strategy is reviewed annually and is largely determined by the requirements of delivering the capital budget. The current Treasury position is summarised in section 4 of the report. The most significant feature is the £573 million forecast borrowing requirement to deliver the approved capital programme over the next 5 years. This will bring the Council's estimated borrowing to more than £1 billion by 2027-28. The Council's Treasury advisors have provided a forecast of UK bank rate and future Public Works Loans Board borrowing rates attached at Appendices 1 and 2. As set out in sections 5 and 6 of the report, the economic context is such that long-term PWLB rates are not expected to fall below 4% before early 2024. The proposed Treasury strategy is therefore a combination of deferring new borrowing until later into 2024. Sorry, I'll start again. The proposed Treasury strategy is therefore a combination of deferring new borrowing until later into 2024, when rates are expected to be lower, and applying investment balances over time to help finance the capital programme. Alternative sources of funding will also be evaluated, where they compare favourably to prevailing PWLB rates, as will short-term market borrowing should long-term rates remain high. Section 7 considers the Council's investment strategy for short-term cash balances, with the proposed categories of permitted investments attached at Appendix 3. Details of approved counterparties, such as individual banks, are reported to the Finance and Resources Committee as part of the quarterly Treasury activity reports. There are no proposed changes to permitted investments in 2023-24, including the range of investment or monetary limits. The proposed investment strategy is risk-aware, with all permitted investments carrying a low level of risk. As noted, the level of Council investments is expected to continue to reduce over the course of the coming year as funds are applied towards delivering the capital programme. Non-operational properties held solely to earn rental income and or for capital appreciation also form part of the Council's permitted investments. The proposed annual property investment strategy for 2023-24 is detailed in Appendix 4 to the report and is forecast to generate approximately £1.87 million of income. To conclude, as referenced in sections 10 and 11, the Council is required to set prudential indicators to demonstrate that its capital and treasury plans remain affordable, sustainable and prudent. The prudential indicators attached for approval at Appendix 5 have been updated to reflect the decisions made in setting the Housing Capital Investment Programme in January and the 5-year General Fund capital budget in March. Happy to take questions. Provost.
Thank you, Mr Mackenzie. Are there any questions? Questions. Councillor Dave Cuthbert first.
Thank you, Provost. I'm just looking at Appendix 4. I really appreciate the fact that we're actually putting forward a property investment strategy. I was just wondering, will we be seeing a report coming to Council or to the Property Subcommittee with recommendations for which properties we will retain and which ones we might consider selling?
Chief Executive is going to answer.
Oh, sorry to jump in, Stuart, if you were taking it, but I was simply going to say that there's a report on the corporate asset management plan due back to Council in December this year, and that will include an update on our property assets, including those that we would see as no longer operationally required.
Thank you. Bailey, hang on, please.
Thank you. My question is on paragraph 7.10, which is the lending to other local authorities, and I take note of the warnings on there about financial difficulties, and we all know that in the next few years funding for local authorities is going to be stretched. We have lent other local authorities funds, and I'm assuming we get interest back from those amounts that we've lent. And I just wondered if there's going to be a likelihood of that interest request or the repayments that come back to us for those loans are going to be reduced as local authorities' budgets are stretched. And if that's the case, does that impact on the presumed income that you expected from those local authorities?
Thank you, Bailey Ahern. I'm happy to take those questions. The point I was trying to make to elected members, and it was by way of reassurance, is that local authorities are statutory bodies. So I'm aware that elected members, and I'm aware that the national media, not elected members, apologies, the national media sometimes refer to councils going bust or going bankrupt. They do not. There is a set of circumstances which pertains to English local authorities. There's not equivalent legislation in Scotland whereby we serve what's known as a Section 114 notice and seek support through borrowing to fund revenue expenditure in extreme circumstances. But those authorities do not go bust. So in terms of surety over funds and in terms of return of investment, there is no instances of which I'm aware, and I asked this question of our Treasury advisors who also support local authorities across England, if this has ever occurred, and they couldn't think of one. So there's very, very low risk in lending to other local authorities. To put that into some sort of context, and I'm just looking at the figures from close of business on the 9th of May. So these figures are very current. We have £40 million on short-term loan to other local authorities. Of all our investment categories, that gives us the highest rate of return. There's an average rate of return of about 4.5% on that money. That's higher than any other investment category we have at the moment. The other thing I would say is that we also borrow from other local authorities. And one of the options available to us is if long-term interest rates remain high, we can undertake short-term borrowing and roll that forward on a continuing basis. So the point really in the paragraph is just to provide assurance to elected members that this is a sector where there needn't be, despite the headlines, sometimes there needn't be undue concern and undue risk. And again, just for information, at the end of December across the UK, that piece of business in terms of inter-authority lending totaled about £8.5 billion. So it's a very large sector indeed. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mr Mackenzie. Councillor Colin Stewart next, please.
Thanks, Provost. I wanted to ask about the prudential indicators, particularly. I was going to ask about paragraph 11.5, but in 11.3, we're showing our loan charges against our net revenue stream going up by over a third, from 6.4% to 8.7% by 27-28. I just wondered what. I know we set a limit for our unearmarked reserves, our general reserves. Have we ever thought about setting a limit for our loan charge to net revenue stream ratio?
We don't, thank you, Councillor Stewart, we don't set a limit as such. We have a limit in the absolute level of borrowing, which is a measure of affordability, and that's been left at £1.2 billion. We are basically going to double our, if one assumes that we borrow from Public Works Loans Board, and a lot of our borrowing will come from that source, we are basically going to double the amount of outstanding debt we have through the Public Works Loans Board over the next 5 years. That's essentially what's driving that increase in cost, is that to deliver the capital programme at the scale of capital programme we have, there's a revenue consequential of that. So what we have at the moment is a long-term funding strategy which is linked to growth in the council tax base. And what I'm committed to do as part of the work on asset management planning and asset management strategy, which the Chief Executive has alluded to earlier, is come back to Council with a revised funding strategy. But members will be aware that I have flagged the challenges around the delivery of capital and issues of affordability in terms of the increasing revenue costs. But we're going to have to see a substantial growth in our level of borrowing to support the level of capital investment we have planned.
Okay, thank you. And then just seeing as you mentioned the £1.2 billion limit, can I just check whether that is a gross limit or whether that's net after the subtracting the short-term market investments as we've shown in section 4.1?
So it will be net of short-term market investments. Those are expected to reduce significantly over the next few years as we effectively unwind that money and apply it to our capital budget. But it's gross of all our debt. So it's not just Public Works Loans Board, it's the money we have in Lobos, it's the money we have in terms of a loan for PFI, PPP schools project. So it's the totality of our debt, Councillor Stewart.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mackenzie. Councillor Donaldson.
Provost, can I just ask Stuart, on clearly the biggest chunk of our borrowing is the Public Works Loan Board, in other words, Debt Management Office, in other words, the UK Treasury. But can I just ask Stuart what consideration finance officers have given to potential other sources? I'm thinking in particular of the UK Infrastructure Bank, where there may be a difference of 20 basis points against, and that can be on large projects quite significant. If you could just say some words on that.
Happy to do that, Councillor Dawson, and there was no prompting or advance notice of your question, but colleagues did meet with representatives of the UK Infrastructure Bank yesterday, so on a particular project. So those discussions are ongoing. So we are looking at alternatives, and as you say, what the Infrastructure Bank is offering, and it is effectively funded through the Treasury, is about 0.2% lower rates than prevailing PWLB rates. So those discussions are ongoing, and we will also look at other possibilities if they are lower in cost than PWLB. That might include some commercial opportunities, although I suspect not, because PWLB rates are pretty competitive. And also the issue of short-term borrowing. We might just have to roll forward our borrowing on a kind of continuing basis until long-term rates are down, and then we can get surety over long-term costs by taking out a PLB loan at an appropriate time. But the strategy is predicated on pushing any new borrowing as far into 2024 as possible, because we expect rates to fall over the course of 2024.
Thank you,
Stuart, thank you. And that's very helpful for the update. And I'm sure you're certainly on the UK Infrastructure Bank. We may indeed hear further updates with finance and resources. But thanks very much.
Thank you. Leader of Council to move the report, please.
Thanks, Provost. I'll be brief. Councillors, the requirement of SIPA's Code of Practice for Treasury Management is that our annual Treasury and investment strategy is approved by full Council. Consideration of the strategy today fulfills that requirement. The Head of Finance has already provided elected members with a comprehensive update on the specific contents of the report. On that basis, you may be pleased to hear that I will keep my remarks brief. Specifically, we are being asked to approve our 5-year Treasury strategy to 27-28, approve the permitted investment and investment strategy for 2023 to 2024, approve our property investment strategy 2023 to 2024, and approve the prudential indicators for 2023-24 to 2027-28. So I'm happy to move the report on that basis.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Deputy Leader to second.
Happy to be briefer still, Provost. Happy to second.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments on paper? If there are no comments on paper, can we read the report, please? Thank you. Members, item 9 is the establishment of the short-term member officer working group for National Park and Perth Kinross. Can members agree the remit and the membership?
Agreed.
Thank you. Members, item 10 is appointment to committees and outside bodies.
There's an amendment put forward.
Sorry. Okay, Councillor Forbes, an amendment.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I don't remember us agreeing when we put this money aside that we would specify the area that we were to look at. So therefore, I would put forward an amendment which removes the line principally between Cairngorms National Park and Loch Lomond in the Trossachs National Park, and just leave it open for the group to decide whereabout in Perth and Kinross we should be looking at.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Budget motion, as I recall, does say Northern Perthshire. So we could perhaps
not decision-making body.
Reflect that. I don't think it's open to the whole of Perth and Kinross. It is quite, that was specifically what the council agreed. Councillor Allen, you have a second. You're seconding it.
Actually, it did.
I'm happy to second the motion by Councillor Forbes.
Amendment.
Sorry, the amendment.
Get a vote. We're going to get a vote.
Bill McLaren, your phone was unmuted there, just so you're aware. It's now muted. If you just give us a second to get clarity on that.
So Councillor Forbes. Oh, sorry.
Unmute himself on my apologies. So the budget motion agreed on the 1st of March said the Northern Perthshire National Park bid. So the your amendment would then be presumably just to remove the description where it says principally between Cairngorms and Loch Lomond and the Trossachs, and just say in Northern Perthshire.
Scott's come back to me, so it's in a second.
Sorry, I'm not sure who's speaking at the moment, Provost.
Sorry, the head of legal governance was providing advice here in the room, but as I say, so your amendment would then be to remove the bit where it says principally between Kinross National Park and Loch Lomond and the Truscott National Park, and just say in Northern Perthshire.
That will be fine. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, well, I'm happy to officially move the original thing and accept that in, so that we can agree that our members happy with that.
Yep, I'm happy to second that.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Hewen, a MOG is not a decision-making body. The final report will come to council as it says in the terms of reference. So the MOG will be bringing forward some proposals, but the council will obviously decide on any matters. Okay. Members can make the revised terms of reference and membership.
Sorry, Provost, for jumping in. I'm not actually sure what we've been asked to do here. The original proposal I can see in front of me, and I think was in line with what we discussed at full council. The new proposal seems to change what was discussed in, and I think we would spend time, if we widen the remit, we'll weaken our chance of achieving what we're trying to achieve as a national park. So are you proposing to accept the amendment, or are you proposing that we go with the document we have in front of us, paper 9?
So officers sought to draft a terms of reference for the short-term working group, which is fairly open and inclusive, I think. Their Councillor Forbes has asked that we remove the bit where it says principally between the Kinross National Park and Loch Lomond Trust National Park, and just use the term Northern Perthshire, which was in the budget motion. Personally, I think Northern Perthshire is the bit between Kinross National Park and Loch Lomond and Truscott National Park, so I don't think it actually materially changes the area being looked at anyway. But I'm happy for some unanimity on the subject, just to accept that change, because I don't actually think it changes what is intended or desired. I think Northern Perthshire covers that, so I think that is okay, Mr. Leader.
Well, so just for clarity, it's not the whole of Perthshire then, we're still talking about Northern Perthshire.
Indeed, and the budget motion was quite specific. It is Northern Perthshire, and therefore it could only be Northern Perthshire. As the council decision less than 6 months ago was Northern Perthshire. That's what the money is for.
Thank you for the clarity.
Okay. So members, therefore, what we are agreeing is, and I'm just going to read it out now, just for everyone's clarity. The remit would be agree a name and geographic area to be covered by the proposed national park within Perth Kinross in the Northern Perthshire. It would be agree a communications engagement plan for the community and stakeholder consultation process, develop the draft submission for the creation of the new national park to the Scottish Government for agreement by council, and it will come back to council as I indicated for agreement. And the membership is myself as convener, Councillor Lane as vice convener, Bailey Alistair Bailey, Bailey Finn McLaren, and Councillor John Duff. Members, can we agree that?
Agreed.
Members, item 10 is the appointment to committees and outside bodies. These are as they were on the agenda, and your order paper this morning, with the addition of Councillor Dave Cuthbert is replacing me on the Learning and Families Sector Subcommittee. Members, can we agree the appointment as on the order paper?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Members, item 11 is the election members' briefing notes. And we note the briefing notes that have been made to elect members since the last meeting of council on the 8th of February, as set out on the agenda. Right, members, that concludes today's business. Thank you very much for persevering through the technical issues today. We will report back to you as soon as possible on these issues, and I wish you all safe travel.